So I'm Rod Mason. I'm General Counsel for Panasonic Corporation in Canada. My experience goes back 15 years when I joined Panasonic Canada Inc., which is the main Panasonic subsidiary in Canada. But I also supervise one other lawyer. So it's a very small law department in Canada. It's much bigger in the United States. But together, she and I look after the legal work for Panasonic Canada and the other North America business units who require legal advice or services in Canada from time to time.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So we've got a great mix then of people here to talk about this issue. And I feel like this conversation on the real need for a disruption in how legal services are delivered has been going on for some time. And now with COVID, that discussion has only accelerated given the realities on the ground. And the role of alternative legal service providers within the legal ecosystem of Canada has never seemed more pertinent to me at least. So let's just start off first by setting the scene and by asking all the panelists what the concept of alternative legal service provider means to you. And maybe how about we start with Zena on this one, and then we'll go Richard, Rob, Steve.
Sure. So just for anyone who's not clear, I'll actually spell out, we did say about ALSPs and its alternative legal service providers. Traditionally, service providers have been law firms, whether it's a 2-person law firm or a 2,000-person law firm. That's sort of the traditional. So when we look at the word alternative, you're looking at what's an alternative to the traditional model of law firm. And since 2008, when there was the financial crisis of 2008, you've really seen a shift in the market away from service providers, law firms setting a price and customers having to take that price. And so what started to happen is customers are pushing back. Clients are saying, we're not going to pay those heavy rates, or we'll pay your heavy rate, but we want to know what the efficiency play is. We want to know how you're going to help us meet our legal demands without the same sort of business model that led us to the crisis of 2008. And so that's when you started to see alternatives pop up. Whether you describe alternatives as firms that are smaller in size and bill everything on a flat fee, that would be an alternative. Whether you see like CEO Law, where it's a collection of lawyers who work together, not in a traditional firm structure, to offer legal services. Some of the other things you may have seen gaining traction in the market, particularly recently, are Deloitte and E&Y providing ancillary services to their audit and tax and accounting services and the consulting services. They're also providing legal services. And to some people, that's considered an ALSP as well, because it's outside of that traditional law firm model, notwithstanding that it's a very similar professional services model. And then finally, there's some other things that are happening in the market too that I think you should consider as alternative legal service providers. Things like litigation finance, which is not huge up in Canada, but it's coming. People like Buford Capital, who are basically taking that burden of litigation off of your plate and financing those litigations for you. And that's another alternative legal service delivery model. And so when you think about ALSPs, we're really talking about things that fly in the face of the traditional law firm model. And many of the law firms themselves, particularly the bigger ones, have actually started their own in-house subgroups that have a different model. So for example, you'll have at Castles Brock, they have 4 lines. At Osler's, they have Osler's transactional work. Torrey's has an office in Halifax, for example. And those are arguably also ALSPs. They're alternative delivery models for legal service, although they sit in that traditional format. So I'll leave it there, and maybe we can turn it over to somebody else to share their vision.
Mm-hmm. And actually, I said Richard, Robert, but maybe we'll do Steve next, actually, to just sort of bookend that. Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. Well, as Zena mentioned, I mean, ALSP, it's alternative legal service provider. And I think, that means players who are trying to disrupt the status quo. And to me, I think that it is called alternative for now, but I do think that it's going to enter into the mainstream. And then companies like CEO Law will just be legal service providers. And I think it's all about addressing fundamental issues that will bring it into the mainstream. So making things more connected and responsive and transparent, and giving people, customers, access to really high quality legal support at a really high value point, with unique technology to make the relationship a better one, and then looking for ways to ensure that the customer relationship is really respected and made better. And to me, I think it's all about putting the customer first. I mean, we're called CEO Law because it's customer, employee, owner, meaning customers come first, and then employees are really highly regarded as key tools to make sure that you have happy customers, and then owners come last. And I think in the traditional model, it hasn't always been that way. I think there may have been more concern for the owners than the customers. And so I think that these alternative legal service providers will come into the mainstream as customers insist on being treated at the forefront.
Thank you. Richard?
Yes, the way I think about this is very much in the area of cost containment and expense management. Our experience pre-COVID is such that we have always been very careful about our spend generally, but our legal spend is quite variable depending on business unit activities, and because we have a life co, the claims volatility is unpredictable. So we are very careful about what we spend. So for me, we always look around for better ways to get legal services at a better price. Full disclosure, I've known Steve for years, and we've used a number of CEO Law lawyers, and our experience has been just what it would be if it was with a big firm. The parent company and Empire Life are both reporting issuers. So we have a tendency to go to the big firms because some of our complex matters require expertise from different pockets. So there'll be some breadth of experience that a large firm can bring. But when we have the need for not so complex files that don't require that breadth, we will definitely pursue an alternative. Post-COVID, our businesses are very strong. We're very well capitalized, strong balance sheets, but our revenue is not where it was or what we anticipated for this year, and we think it's going to continue on for next year. So we hope it doesn't, but it could. So we're even more careful about what we spend. We've got 5 lawyers at Empire. They're very, very busy. We've had no drop in activity. And because we're so busy, we do go outside, but we are very careful of where we go. If we go to a big firm, we get discounts. We won't give the firm a file if we don't get a discount to the fees that they charge. So that's how we deal with the need for breadth if we need it. The other comment I would make is it's sort of interesting. Empire Life happened to be able to process new business digitally. So no one had to touch a new piece of business coming in for some of our products. And our company has become very digitally oriented. We're trying to do a lot more with tech in every part of our business. And alternatives like CEO Law, I'm promoting Steve here, but alternatives like CEO Law allow you to get a full meal deal when you're getting your legal services, which is not what we get elsewhere. And our lawyers are younger than me. They're young lawyers who know how to work with technology, and they enjoy the experience. So we've got more work to do there to sort of piggyback on our cost containment, but we're certainly moving along that path.
Thank you. Robert?
Well, Richard said a lot of what I was going to say, but I'd like to pick up on one specific point he made, which is controlling spending. Because nothing annoys me more than getting a bill from a downtown law firm where I see one of two things. Double billing or having more lawyers on the file than is strictly necessary. And then the overall partner in charge coming in and billing for, I don't know what, supervision, I guess. Well, these are surprises, nasty surprises, and I always end up having to call and beat the attorney up at the other end of the phone line. With Steve, and I haven't used this more than once, but I know it's a great function, and I'd invite him to weigh in on this. He has a technology tool where you can actually see probably by the day, but very, very frequent updates as to which attorney is billing and how much it is. So if I wanted to, I could monitor it that closely. And it's technology driven, it's very fast. And I find that to be completely new. What major law firm has ever done more than send out a bill with perhaps detailed billing at the end of the month or the end of the quarter? At that point, it's probably too late. If I see something in Steve's report that is bothering me, I pick up the phone and call either the attorney or Steve. I haven't had to do that, but I have the option of doing it.
Could I, if I may, make one more comment?
Absolutely.
And this, it's unintended, but it is a CEO law compliment. When I'm looking for a lawyer that I think requires, I want to go to a big firm for whatever the reason may be. So for example, if I have a high profile matter that I might be reporting into our board, I'm more prone to go to a big firm in that kind of a circumstance. But my practice is I have a very good relationship with a lead partner at one of the big firms. I call him and I say, I need someone to do this kind of work for me. Can you source that person for me? And because they know how we work at my firm, at my office, they know our style, they know what we're looking for. I get put onto somebody, and typically the service is very good because the lead partner manages it and makes sure that the work is good. CEO law has a similar model for me. I can reach out to Steve and say, I need a lawyer that has this kind of expertise. Do you have that in your warehouse? And if so, and if I don't need the breadth of a big firm, I'm going to go to the lower cost solution for sure. So it's a way of delivering the services, which is not unlike a big firm, the way I deal with CEO law.
Steve, did you want to comment?
Yeah, well, I mean, the technology is the piece that I mentioned that I think is really important as these different ways of doing things come into the mainstream. So I think table stakes is always going to be great lawyers, which we have. And then this element of better value that Rob and Richard mentioned, I think that's critically important because people are demanding it. The customers are demanding better value. So great lawyers at better prices. And then what I think really layers in that is, again, critically important is this technology piece. And so for us, that's where we've really invested a lot of time and money and received funding from the government as well to create this platform that creates a more connected, responsive, transparent experience. So when Rob mentions the transparency around billing, that's really important. And so we let customers see time the second the lawyer enters it. So you can't have any more up-to-date insight into where your matter is at. It's like you're sitting right beside the lawyer as soon as they make an entry of time. We think that's really important. And then the matching that Richard alludes to, I think it's great when you've got a person to make that connection and make sure you get the best lawyer. With us, our platform will also allow that. So our goal is to have 1,000 lawyers on the platform. With 1,000 lawyers, I'm not going to be able to have every conversation to make sure that the match is done perfectly, but technology can do that. And so people will be able to screen across a wide variety of characteristics, including is the lawyer available to get the work done on the time frame that's required. And then where I think it's really important is that after that connection is made, the customer should be able to speak with the lawyer. And that's really where the connections are formed and the customer gets the confirmation that, yes, this is a great lawyer who can really help me. And again, our platform will facilitate those connections easily through technology. So the customer can do the screening and then set up a call with the lawyer where the two calendars are synced and then have that call and make sure they want to proceed. And that's the kind of technology that we think is really important for bringing alternative providers into the mainstream.
Yeah, if I can, Carol, I think one of the really important things that this part of the conversation underscores is this idea around transparency and technology. And even if you don't have, for example, you're not working with CEO law, there are technologies on the market where you can actually force whatever provider you're working with into demonstrating that kind of technology for you and actually tracking the legal services to that extent as well. So that, the technology imperative is there, whether you're using an ALSP or otherwise. And there are definitely ways for corporate counsel to ingest that kind of technology themselves into their own workflows.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So interesting. And, I want to talk more about this technology piece. But before that, though, I'd love to sort of be able to understand the space and get an outline of sort of what the market looks like even in Canada. So I'm wondering if we can talk about that too, to sort of set the scene a bit better in terms of what ALSPs do and how to get started and sort of what that market looks like. So maybe talking about Canada first, how much do our alternative legal service providers take up in the legal services space? And just sort of what does it look like right now? Maybe Zena, if you can weigh in, and then also Steve.
Sure. So the Legal Executive Institute, which is a thought leadership arm of Thomson Reuters, recently did a survey of Canadian corporate counsel and a state of the Canadian corporate market report that came out earlier this year. And ALSPs has been a hot topic, not just since 2008. And so one of the things that we asked about was how much of your budget. What's interesting is that in Canada, it's making up about 3% of external spend for corporate counsel is going to ALSPs. And it's a trend that we're seeing that grow more and more. Globally, it's closer to 6 or 7%. So actually Canada is probably trending behind the US and the UK and elsewhere. But again, that's no surprise. Generally, we tend to trend behind those other jurisdictions just based on the way that we practice and the fact that Canada financially tends to be a little bit more conservative. But it is 3%. If you think about, what your, and Robert and Richard, you would each know what your own legal spend is, and 3% is probably a pretty nice chunk. And as corporations get bigger, 3% becomes a bigger and bigger number. And like I said, it is trending upwards.
Yeah, Steve, tell us, what's it like being in that space? Who are your competitors? How many are there? What's it like?
Well, I think that there is a growing number of competitors, but I would agree that the market is still nascent in Canada, so there's lots of room to grow. When we look at the market for legal services in Canada, it's well documented that it's about 25 billion, and then the corporate space is more of that. So some of that space is for consumers, and then the majority, about 2/3, is for companies. And when we look at that space, we believe that in the meaty middle, the space for companies between 5 and 100 million in revenue, there's at least a $5 billion market opportunity there. And just in Ontario, we see a market of 100,000 companies that could use the services of alternative legal service providers. And so that's what we want to move into. And so our goal is to get 10,000 of those companies being served by 1,000 lawyers. And when Zena talks about 3% going to ALSPs, and that being half of what may exist in other countries, of course, we'd like to see that number significantly higher. And that's where I say alternative is going to move into the mainstream. And so I foresee that, the majority of spend will go to these alternative legal service providers as they live up to this promise of delivering great lawyers at a better value point with unique technology to make the customer experience a better one.
Okay, thanks. And, speaking to Richard and Robert, how did you even get started? How did you even know this was available? How did you, who's using it? You guys are very prominent GCs and big companies. Like, how did you get drawn to this type of service? And what's the client experience been?
So I'll go first this time. There were a few others in a business that would be considered competitors with Steve. And I didn't see a huge value add to me to go with those firms. I gave them a little bit of work, but I didn't see the big value add there. And then Steve came along, and I thought, oh, he's just another one of these. And I actually visited his office. It was in, I believe, Bloor and Yonge area at that time. Very small office, very compact. But I thought, okay, here's a guy who's really looking after the bucks. And for that first meeting, I think we really focused on ways that he could help me control legal spend. So he didn't spend a lot of time, promoting his lawyers, other than to say he had a very strong roster in a large number of areas. And what impressed me the most was he had the same philosophy as I would have as a general counsel of trying to control legal spend. So that was a big plus for Steve. But again, I was skeptical. How could the rates be so economic and still get quality service? So I gave it a try with 2 or 3 smaller files, and I was very satisfied, and I just kept going more and more with CEO law and taking more and more business away from the 2 or 3 larger firms that we otherwise would have assigned projects to. The other thing I would say is that, as I mentioned before, there's only 2 of us in Canada serving Panasonic Canada. So oftentimes there's a problem with workload that we just can't take on a new project. So I just completed a project like this with one of Steve's lawyers. I said, I want you to do the whole project. And he was a very competent commercial former general counsel, I believe. And that's the biggest job I've done with CEO law so far. And I would definitely go back. Very, very impressive. Headcount is not I don't have the flexibility to add even a part-time lawyer. So this is another way of adding a part-time lawyer at a very reasonable cost. A little more than I pay in wages, but still, it's hard to get a really good quality attorney. We're only interested in working part-time as an employee of our corporation.
Thank you. Richard, how did you get started?
Well, I've known Steve for, I don't know how many, we went to the same high school, so I've known Steve for a long time.
Oh.
We played basketball on the same team, and if you saw us, our heights, Steve is far taller, so he played a lot more than I did. But so when this started up, I'm the same as Robert. What we're looking for in our business and what our needs are. What we had done in the past at my office was where we could, we would go to. So Kingston is where Empire Life is located. There are law firms there that charge an hourly rate that is much less than what you're going to pay for in Toronto or Ottawa or Montreal or Vancouver, where we have business across the country. So one approach that we had taken was to go to smaller cities with good litigation lawyers, for example, and you would be paying a lot less for your legal expenses in standard litigation files. So we tried that approach, and it has had some success. However, CEO law, we have used probably, I don't know, I had a call with a CEO lawyer on Tuesday, and we're having one later on today for 2 different files, because I can get this work done without having to spend $800 an hour for a lawyer. Truth be told, the companies that I work for are owned by a family, and although they did hire me, and I think they like me, they're not a big fan of the legal profession. So I have to work hard to keep our costs down for them. We have the same experience with our accounting firms that we use. We try to keep the professional fees as low as we possibly can. So when this offering came from CEO Law, we take advantage of it every time we can. It's just, and we have had nothing but high quality service. What we look for is quality and cost. And when I say quality, I look at 2 things. Can the lawyer demonstrate that he or she has the expertise in the area of law that we're needing the help? And the second thing is service. We demand a high quality of service. We don't have a situation, it just wouldn't happen. We wouldn't go back to a law firm that didn't return calls and didn't respond to emails. That just wouldn't happen in our world. So the lawyers I've worked with, Steve's outfit, have been very timely, and we've had just a very good experience. So
it seems, Sina, did you want to jump in?
I did, but I was
about to ask you anyway, so go for it.
Oh, perfect. So one of the things I was going to say is, Rob and Richard have both really talked about how to use ALSPs for cost containment, for budgeting purposes, and for overflow. But there's a whole bunch of other scenarios in which we're seeing our customers or other clients in the field using ALSPs for things like maternity leaves
Yeah.
or any kind of leave, really. It doesn't have to be maternity leave. That one just tends to be a little bit more routine. But any sort of leave, particularly when you either in-house and therefore you have a gap in service, or even for firms. Firms also hire ALSPs to help fill gaps when there's overflow, when there's a particularly large file that comes in, when there's, e-discovery issues and something needs a second set of eyes or a second mechanism of eyes, when there's a serious time crunch. And so there's lots of different ways and reasons why you would want to reach out to ALSPs. I just wanted to sort of put it out there that it's not always just about budget containment or overflow work that a team of two can handle. Sometimes it's an area of expertise. Sometimes you're looking for a particular kind of legal expertise that for whatever reason doesn't live in a firm or doesn't live in the firm that is your incumbent. And so you want to go somewhere else to get that expertise. And sometimes you go to seek that expertise. So at each of the various ALSPs that exist in the market, there are different people who have a particular, not everybody, but there are people within those organizations that have a strong expertise, might even be a law society, designated expert in a particular area. And that's a way to get a hold of that expertise without having to engage a whole nother firm. Or if you don't have a firm on your panel, it's another way to go and find that expertise beyond what you're used to working with. So I just wanted to point that out because it's not always about cost containment, and it's not always about what the makeup of your firm or your department looks like.
That's
that's a very good point. We would absolutely use it. We would absolutely consider this as an alternative in the event of a mat leave, and it hasn't happened yet, but this would be for sure a consideration if we could fill that gap with an alternative service provider like a CEO lawyer. CEO law lawyer. We would certainly entertain that.
Can I make one other point?
Yeah.
I think it hasn't been mentioned before, but I have also used alternate legal services provider for research. And I think the benefit of that is very experienced corporate commercial attorney, as opposed to an articling student or a first-year associate with a law firm. So I may ask from time to time, can you do some research for me on, I don't know, changes to the Canada Business Corporations Act or developments in a particular area of human rights or employment law? I want to read that, and I want to, as I said before, I'm a working attorney. I do most of the legal work. I want to read that and reach a conclusion on it. And then maybe call up that person and bounce some ideas around with them. So that sort of knowledge acquisition is important to me as well.
It's bang on. I mean, the call that I had on Tuesday with the CEO law lawyer was for precisely that sort of a thing. We were putting together a bit of because of my HR hat, we're doing some work on diversity and so forth. And I had some ideas on how I'd like to set it up. So I'm talking to a seasoned senior lawyer who's done this kind of work before. And it's for that precise reason, Margaret. I'm trying to bounce some ideas on, I don't want to be too ambitious. I want to do it the right way. I want to make it the right fit for what Empire is all about. And I did exactly what you're talking about. So it is another way to use that resource for sure.
Thank you. Steve, did you want to also add? It's so important at this point that it's not just competition with the large law firms, but also filling a really important gap, right, in legal services. So
yeah, so I kind of see a range of work that companies typically need. So there's bet the company work that Richard kind of alluded to when he said, there's certain work where he likes to go to a big law firm, he's got to take it to the board, and we could put that in the bucket of bet the company. And then there's specialized work, and I think Richard and Robert were talking a little bit about this, and Zena as well. Like, it could be that there's an employment issue or there's a litigation matter or things like that, which I would characterize as specialized work, which may be outside the normal scope of what general counsel do. And then there's overflow work, when general counsel just get too busy to do the day-to-day, and maybe mat leaves fit into that, where there's day-to-day work that needs to be done, and then there's mundane work. And I kind of think that often with alternative legal services providers, people believe it's only the mundane work that can be handled. And so that may be where you get your first opportunity, and that's okay. But I think over time, as you do a good job, then you convince people that, oh, well, wait, maybe we can do some of the overflow. And then you try and move up to the specialized. Maybe we can do some of the specialized. And then the bet the company work, that's going to take some time. But when I talk about having 1,000 lawyers at CEO Law, for example, that's where at 1,000 lawyers, I believe we can do the same work that anybody can do at any law firm in Canada, where it is going to be specialized, it is going to be bet the company work. And so maybe that's a ways off. And right now, yeah, we'll start with the mundane, then we'll do the overflow, and we'll do the specialized. And that's where I think we can really help.
I mean, yeah, and Richard, Robert, how do you guys find this balance? What's the work that's sort of still being exclusively done by the larger law firms, and how do you find this balance in using these different legal service providers? How do you decide which work goes to who? And
well, maybe I'll start. We in the last couple of weeks, we did a capital markets transaction. So there's a firm that we've used before that does this work, and you need a bit of a team to do these sorts of projects. And the time frame that we were trying to work within was about a week, and we were under the gun. Like, it was a big deal for us, and we needed to go to a law firm that could provide that kind of service. But interestingly, on that one, you pay for it. You pay for it. You pay a capital markets, you pay a bit more, even though we did get a discount. But and another file I'm working on that is also it's sort of a capital markets exercise, and on those if I'm going to be distributing that work to my boss, who's the chairman of our board, I'm going to probably use a firm that he and a lawyer that he has had in our boardroom before. But apart from that sort of work, I would now, because of my experience with the lawyers at CEO Law, I would have to have quite a thought about whether I'd go to a big firm or not. Do I really need to use a big firm? Because I can get really high quality for great value with a firm like CEO Law. So that's kind of the way I think about it. We pretty much every file that comes in the door, we have to think about where we're going to send it. We always do. But this is now an option that is a really viable option for us for a lot of our files.
And I think from Panasonic's point of view, we do a lot of acquisitions. A lot of times the acquisitions are global acquisitions. And when you ask, how do I sort of divide up the work between the large law firm versus a company like CEO Law, for the acquisitions, I think a classic case where our parent company wants a Macmillan's or wants a Goodman's, because if there's an error somewhere along the way, they want to be able to sue those providers. It's almost like a board requirement, I think, is the best way to put it. And the other way, or the other time when I would go to a large law firm, is where I know from past experience with a particular attorney, he or she has a real expertise in an area. Example being consumer product safety. It's an area that I'm quite familiar with, but a lot of general counsel or in-house counsel don't come across that issue very often. If they have one person on staff whose expertise in that's not the case. But what I need is, here's the conclusion I've reached. Can you confirm it for me from your years of experience in that very unique niche? And there could be other areas like that as well, privacy perhaps, or castle compliance. But I find that list getting shorter and shorter as I deal more with CEO Law and find, oh, you really do have that experience. You have that experience in trademarks. Well, I know next to nothing about trademarks. Okay, help me out. So I had a longer list to begin with. I think I'm down to 2 or 3 issues now of a niche category that I'd go to a large law firm on.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting. I want to pick up too on a point that Zina made, which is on how ALSPs can advise law departments and law firms on optimizing their strategy and structures using technology enabled delivery services. Do you have any perspectives on this value of the law firms using internal ALSPs? Anyone? Have you done that in CEO law, Steve?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm not sure I really followed.
Where you have an ALSP advising actually a law firm. And so in a way, you know, for these general counsel coming to a law firm and, you know, and then choosing between this and that, instead sort of a fusion where those gaps are also being filled by the ALSP, sort of maybe in tandem or with a collaborative partnership between the law firm. I don't know how that would work, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, so that's absolutely work that we have done. And so when Rob mentioned things like patent and trademark work, for example, there are firms who don't have that expertise, so they'll come to us and they use us, or employment matters, or litigation, or transactional work. We're doing some transaction work right now for a law firm that doesn't really have that transactional expertise. So we can definitely help out. And I would say right now we're doing that primarily with smaller law firms, and it's kind of an extension of their expertise set where somebody comes to them and they can't do it, and so rather than turn the client away, it makes sense to use an alternative provider like CEO Law. I do think that there's a role for us to work with big firms as well, the biggest firms in Canada, and we've had some of those conversations, but we haven't really started. But that's where I think the fact that many of these big firms are creating their own internal ALSPs, it's about their own recognition that they need to come up with something where there's a better value proposition for their customers. And so that's what we can offer. I do think that in some cases, those alternative value propositions that get offered within the big firm, there is a question about why don't those lawyers work within the name firm? Like, why are they part of this, you know, let's call it the value brand? And so that's an open question, and it may raise questions around, you know, are those the best lawyers, or are they, you know, is there some other reason why they're, you know, they're part of the value brand? With us, all of our lawyers are the best lawyers, so that's where we think there is a role for big firms to use us instead of building it, and maybe we can give them a higher quality product as far as the lawyers. But yeah, I definitely think there is a role for alternative legal service providers to not just work directly with the customers, but also work with other players in the industry. And I would say the same thing for technology companies too. So when Zena talks about there are companies in the space that provide technology solutions that may be around, you know, due diligence for documents or incorporation or minute book management or, you know, deal syndication, things like that. I think there's room for those companies to work with CEO Law, for example, and then we can expose all of those various solutions to our customers and then also to other players in the space who may be able to take advantage of that kind of collaboration.
Yeah, and going back to my firm days, like I said, I did spend time in a couple of big firms in the country, and RFP responses are continuing to be to gain more and more traction in the market, and people are going out to tender with legal services as they would with anything else. And often you'll see a big firm that may not have a jurisdictional presence in a particular area partner with an ALSP, or partner with a regional firm, but sometimes partner with an ALSP where they know, to Steve's point, they know the quality of the lawyers that they're getting, and they partner with the ALSP to provide that jurisdictional support. So for example, Robert mentioned a couple of big Toronto firms that he uses. They're both Toronto firms and don't have a footprint anywhere else. And so if they wanted to take their expertise, one of those firms, for example, has a very strong real estate expertise. If they wanted to do a transaction in, you know, in a Montreal or in some other jurisdiction where they don't have feet on the ground, that this is a way to have feet on the ground to do a joint RFP response back to the client and then become compliant for that RFP response. So the high value work stays with the law firm, and you get the jurisdictional expertise that you don't otherwise have.
Can we talk also about this idea of how why Canada's lagging behind these other markets? I mean, Zena, you mentioned it just a bit, but like if we could kind of unpack that, why, you know, it's half, the ALSPs are, the market is half of what it is in the UK and Australia, in the US.
So, I mean, culturally, Canadians are far more conservative from a business perspective. So even if you just think about our business culture versus the business culture in the US, we're far more conservative. And then from a Canadian to UK perspective, the economy of scale is very different. We're a very small, very tight-knit market in Canada. I mean, even if you think about, we've talked a lot about big law firms, a whole bunch of big law firm names have been discussed. They're all, when everybody's in the office, not working in their homes, they're all within a 5-block radius of one another in downtown Toronto. And in those same buildings are all of our banks, all of our manufacturing, not all of our manufacturing, but many of the head offices. It's a very small community in Canada and very limited pockets where you're going to see that those businesses, you know, there's really 4 major cities that you're going to see sort of business coming out of in Canada. So part of it stems from the economy of scale. Part of it stems from our conservative nature generally as a country. And then I would also add that leverage in Canadian law firms and the operating model of Canadian law firms is very different. So we tend to have more of a one-to-one model, so one associate to every partner. Whereas when you go to other jurisdictions, US, UK, those numbers dramatically change. So you'll end up with one partner, more like the professional services firms, more similar to a KPMG or a Deloitte, where you have one partner to 6 or 7 associates in some organizations, or even 3 or 4. But in Canada, within the large law firms, that leverage tends to hover around 1.3, 1 to 1.7, but it's never, very few firms, if any, that I can think of offhand are at 1 to 2.
Anyone have anything to add? Otherwise, we've got a bunch of questions too that I want to get to, but anyone wanted to add on this point? It's interesting, right? Like, I mean, it feels in a way that we may, though, be at this point, potential tipping point, right, with COVID and all that. So it's fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to now open it up to our last few minutes to Q&A. But before that, I know, Steve, that you had a few comments that you wanted to make. So I'll open it up to you first.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment around, and I guess it's kind of a segue from what was just said, around why is Canada lagging? And I think maybe it's about our politeness, that where customers may be in a position in other countries where they demand something better. I think Canadians are more polite, and so they're reluctant to make any demands, and so they will allow things to stay the way they have been. But that's where I think any impetus that can be put into the market to have people just give it a try and see if there really is something better out there that you know, they should at least you know, give a chance. And that's where I think that would allow Canada to catch up with some of the rest of the world. So we'd like to do anything we can to try and incent that. So on this notion, like Richard and Robert have mentioned, that once they tried CEO law, they gradually built up a trust level. We want to encourage people to give us a try. And so what we want to do is that for everyone who's attended the webinar today, we want to give you an incentive to give CEO law a try. So what we're going to offer to everyone, and I'll follow up with an email that confirms this, a $500 value or 2 hours of one of our lawyers' time for no charge. And that will allow you to try out the lawyers that we have on the team and see if we really can exceed your expectations. So yeah, that's what we want to do to try and bring that 3% in Canada up to a better number.
Well, I'm gonna ask before Robert gets a chance. Does that apply to us as well?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so let's turn it to the Q&A. We do have a few questions here. I'll start with this one, which says, you know, now it seems that there's a general shift underway with the millennial generation and Gen Z. What do you think the impact will be here in terms of the usage of ALSPs and the ALSP market? Who'd like to start?
Well, I'll take that one. I mean,
okay.
I think that there is definitely a change. And so I start with the lawyers, the people who work in the firms. I definitely believe that the new generation of lawyers is looking for something better, and that they're looking for a way of practicing that will resonate with them to a higher degree. And that's where I think ALSPs offer a different way of practicing outside of the big firm model that's going to become increasingly attractive. And in fact, it's attractive to older lawyers as well. So many of the senior lawyers on our team, they just love working in our model because they get to just do what they love, which is do legal work, and they don't have to worry about marketing themselves or doing paperwork or any of those things. So I do think there's a shift underway, and I think it's going to be accelerated by COVID as people work from home and things like that, where people are looking for something better. some better way to practice as a lawyer. And then from the customer side, I think it's going to be the same thing. I think that Gen Y and Gen Z, like, they don't call a cab when they want to ride. They call an Uber because they've been introduced to this different, better way of doing things. And I think that same kind of thinking is going to spill over into the practice of law. And so alternative legal service providers have the technology and are going to have this better value proposition where they can do what Uber has done, which is deliver a higher quality product at a far better value point with technology in place to make the customer experience a better one. And so I think that the younger generations with their expectations are going to reshape not just how people practice law, but also how people, customers, consume legal services.
And from a customer standpoint, I think the whole COVID experience has changed the way a lot of executives think. Panasonic used to have a very presence-based culture, meaning you basically had to be in the office 8 hours a day. Now we all know how efficient we can be working from home. So I think the alternative legal services providers, many of them, I would suggest either have a very small, like, shared office space, or in fact work out of a home office. There might have in the past been a bit of a stigma associated with that, not anymore. So I see this as only growing in terms of the way legal services are provided. And of course, the other thing with COVID is severe cost cutting. And we've already spent lots of time on the value proposition that alternative legal services providers can convey.
So I don't disagree with any of that, although I think you have to remember that ALSPs are not operating in a vacuum, and law firms themselves, traditional law firms, are dealing with the exact same issues. And so they are actually recognizing the efficiency of being at home as well. They are also recognizing that Gen Z and millennials operate very differently. And so I think when we think about what it's going to look like in 2 to 3 years, I think Steve's comments earlier on about alternative no longer being alternative but being the mainstream, I think this is really where you're going to start to see the and the way in which people, you know, sometimes I call Uber, sometimes I call a cab. It all just depends on the situation. And I think, and sometimes I use a Bixie bike, right? Like, it all depends, which is a bike sharing service here in Toronto. It all depends really on what's happening in the moment. And I think the idea is that people, law is very much, and I think will continue to be a relationship business. And I think yes, both Richard and Robert have demonstrated today that they both have relationships with strong law firms, whether they're Bay Street firms or otherwise. They also have a strong relationship with CEO law, and that's very clear in the way you've talked about the services Steve has provided to you. But it's an and. It's not an or, and one is not a replacement for the other. And I think the ecosystem of alternative legal service providers or different legal service providers, traditional law firms, and the overlay of technology is going to continue to evolve to a point where the ecosystem generally becomes more efficient. And maybe, just maybe, and don't quote me on this, the billable hour might actually finally die.
That'd be, yeah, so interesting. I'm going to try and squeeze one last question, and then we'll do a round of final comments. And the question is, what is the role of regulators, i.e. law societies here? And do you think there's resistance on this front to help, I guess, you know, disrupt the legal marketplace? Any takers? There's been a lot of past chatter, but not necessarily about legal service providers as it is alternative business structures and the idea of
and ownership structures. And I
go there because that's a whole other panel, a whole fascinating other panel that Andrew can convene. But yeah, do you think the law societies have been supportive or a challenge in terms of sort of accelerate?
I can take that one. And
yeah.
Definitely, I give credit to the Law Society to try, for the efforts that have been made to try and support alternative models. And I do think that the purpose of the Law Society is to, you know, make sure that legal solutions are made available to the public and done so in the best possible way. So I applaud the efforts that have been made. I do think that there's plenty more work that can be done. And I do think that a reality of the Law Society is that it is, you know, it's staffed by lawyers who are part of the legacy model. And so I think that has a way of, bringing with it, the experience of the people that are members of the Law Society. And so it's harder for people who have experienced a legacy model to be, to open their minds the way, the younger generation might. And so I think there is more work that can be done. I think there may be some, some bias in the Law Society that isn't even known. It's not a known bias. It's just from the experience of the people that are within it. And so, like I said, I applaud the efforts that have been made. I think more can be done. I do think that in other jurisdictions like the UK, there has been, more has been done faster to try and open up the market to alternative providers. And so, I think that will happen in Canada. It's just a matter of time.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to now go around for a 20-second final thought from everyone. So I'll start with Richard.
Yeah, thanks. My final thought. I think, not just because of COVID, I think there's so much focus on how technology can improve the way we do business. We are constantly focused on that in my office. We're always thinking about technology. I just think that the opportunity to have a technology platform that provides legal services is just going to take off. I just think that everyone's mind is around how to use tech to improve your cost, to improve your service delivery, to have sharing of information. I just think it's going to grow for sure. And our lawyers are young lawyers who like that kind of thing, and I think it's definitely going to grow.
Thank you. Zena.
I would say about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I presented and I said that we saw 10 years of change in about 10 weeks. I think that's going to continue in this industry. I think this industry was ripe for change, and we kept saying, what's it going to take? What's it going to take? What's it going to take? Well, apparently it takes a pandemic. And while that's not a good thing, silver linings. And I do think that technology, everybody fought the cloud, and now we're all embracing the cloud as we are right now on a Zoom call. I think we fought the cloud, we fought all kinds of other things. And in the last 10 to 15 weeks, it's all eroded. We've become a lot more comfortable with technology. We've become a lot more comfortable with providing legal services to customers, whether through an ALSP or through a traditional law firm or a legal department, in a very different way. And that will only continue, and it will only accelerate. And we will need technology tools and workflow tools to make that happen better and smarter wherever people are located.
Awesome. Thank you. Robert.
So for me, for an alternative legal services provider model to succeed, I need value. And value to me means low cost, lower cost than the big firms, with experienced lawyers and with great quality and great service. And I would not hesitate to go to an alternative legal services provider as long as they can provide me that, as CEO Law has done in the past. That's what my closing thought is.
Thank you. Steve?
Okay, well, I just want to end with some thank yous. So Carol, I want to thank you for keeping us organized and working through the technology issues and, keeping us on track. And of course, I want to thank Zena and Richard and Robert. I really appreciate their time and their insight today. And Richard and Robert have been magnificent customers, so we really appreciate the opportunity that they've given us to work with them. And then for everybody who attended, I want to say thank you for making the time and for giving us your attention. We really appreciate that. And I really do hope that you'll give us a chance to work with you just as Richard and Robert have done, and that, we'll get an opportunity to exceed your expectations.
Thank you. And Andrew, if he's there, yeah, I said, Andrew, would you like a final word? And then
I would like to thank you, Carol, for chairing this webinar. Steve, Richard, Robert, and Zena, thank you very much for participating in all of the preparation work for it. I thought it was a fantastic panel. And a special thanks to CEO Law for being the sponsor of this webinar. And so with that, I think we'll wrap up. So thanks, everyone. Have good mornings, afternoons, wherever you are.
Bye. Thank you.